Hey, good morning, everyone. Kate, Lincoln-Goldfinch here for our regularly scheduled weekly Facebook Live video. Today is Tuesday. It's our English video hour at 11 o'clock. And today I'm here to talk about what immigrants need to know when they anticipate a police interaction. It's probably really obvious to everyone why we're talking about this. This is a very heavy, dark period for our country. We, of course, are still in the midst of a pandemic. Many of us have been in quarantine. We have record numbers of unemployment claims and people who have been stuck at home. And then recently we have sort of the triple incident back to back of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and the failure of law enforcement to arrest his murderers who killed him in the middle of the street for no reason. And shortly on the heels of that, we had the Amy Cooper incident where she threatened, or she did call the police because an African-American bird watcher asked her to leash her dog, and she, in retaliation, called the police and claimed that he was threatening her life. And then, of course, the slow motion murder of George Floyd on camera that shocked the nation. And these back-to-back incidents have resulted in massive protests around the country that have in many cases devolved into looting. And it's just awful. It's awful on so many fronts that we're going through this. And I, for one, hope that the pain that we're all suffering and expressing right now will lead to healing for us. But of course, we can't have a conversation about anything without talking about what's happening in our country. And as the theme of these videos are what the immigrant community needs to know, then what I want to talk to you about today is what I think the immigrant community needs to know in light of the protests that are happening. Now, it's not my place to give people legal advice about whether they should protest or not. That's a very personal decision based on what your beliefs are. And I absolutely encourage civil discourse. And so for people who are considering going out and participating in the protests, of course, I hope everyone continues to be safe and wear masks and engage in social distancing, because we still are in the middle of a pandemic, and we have a failure of leadership keeping us safe and telling us when it's safe to re-engage with one another. And so it's up to us individually to take care of ourselves and the people around us. And, for people, immigrants who get apprehended by immigration in the interior of the country. I'm not talking about people who are crossing the border, but for people who are caught inside the country, over 95% of people get apprehended after an interaction with a police officer. It's rare that it happens, but it's rare that ICE or Immigration and Customs Enforcement just goes out and picks up undocumented people. Of course, it happens. There are raids. We all know that. They will certainly target people who are in their system for one reason or another. Maybe there's a past criminal event or a deportation order in absentia. But it happens, except that the vast majority of people who get caught by immigration in the country do so after they have an interaction with police. And sometimes that's a very minor interaction, like they get pulled over in Bastrop for driving without a license. Or it can be an arrest for a criminal incident. And of course, because of these protests that are happening, as we've all seen on the news, police agencies are on the defensive. They're riled up. They're taking actions against people. They're arresting people on a massive level. They're shooting tear gas into crowds, rubber bullets at people. The police are on edge. And so for immigrants who are at risk of being apprehended by ICE, it's just something that you need to consider and that you need to know if you plan to engage, or if you're driving down the road and you get caught up in a protest accidentally. So when we do these Know Your Rights discussions, we often talk about, the three places that you might have an interaction with the police. One is in your home, where you are the most safe. The second is on the street or at work. And then the third is when you're driving, and you are safest at home. You are least safe when you're driving, without a license. So obviously when you're at home, you guys have all heard the Know Your Rights presentations. Immigration, just like the police, need to have a signed warrant to come into the house, and they need to have a warrant that's signed by a judge that has the proper name of the person who's living in the home. And if they don't have that document, you can tell them to go away. Now, they may wait outside until you leave the house, but you don't have to let anyone in your house unless they have warrants that's signed by a judge. I'm sure that's not news to anyone. What we're mostly talking about today is interactions on the street or in a protest, and I will touch on driving too. The main advice on the street or in a job site raid is to stay calm. Don't run away if you're being stopped or detained by a police officer, because they will chase you and they will assume that you've done something wrong. But you calmly stand in front of them and you ask them if you're being detained or if you're free to go. And if they tell you you're not being detained and you're free to go, you slowly and calmly walk away. If they tell you you're being detained, they are supposed to have probable cause for that, and whether they do or don't is something that you and your attorney can engage with them later. But if they choose to detain you, you remain silent. You do not need to discuss their suspicions about what you've done. You let them do what they're going to do, and you wait until you find an attorney who can help speak for you. If a law enforcement officer is asking you for your ID, then it gets a little tricky, because sometimes police officers are just wanting to get someone's identification to make sure that this isn't a person with a warrant out for their arrest. And if they are properly detaining you and you're not IDing yourself, they can arrest you for that. But you have to make your own decision in the moment about whether this is a racist police officer who's going to arrest you no matter what, or whether this is a non-racist police officer who just wants to determine whether you are a person who can be safely released. That's not something that I can tell you that's going to apply to every scenario, and sometimes you're not going to get it right. And I recognize that when you're being stopped and detained by a police officer, it's very, very difficult to do anything except for what they tell you to do, because it's a very scary scenario. But if you fail to ID, they can arrest you for that. If you are undocumented and you do have ID, let's say a matrícula consular from Mexico, that might be an indicator that you don't have legal status. Now, in the city of Austin, the police officers do not ask people about their immigration status unless it's relevant to their investigation. And in my opinion, undocumented people are safe to disclose, to give their ID to an Austin police officer. That's not true in Bastrop. The police in Bastrop and the Bastrop County Sheriffs are known for arresting people who don't have legal status and racially profiling. That's based on my experience from stories that I've heard from people who have had interactions with them. The same is also true for some places in Williamson County. Now, I'm not, of course, speaking about the policy of the agency or across the board. I'm just telling you guys what I've heard from people that we've spoken with. So the bottom line is you have to make your own determination in the moment about whether you're going to ID. But let's assume, and let me just say, for driving, the same is also true, but you're more at risk if you're driving without a license, because if you don't have a driver's license, if you're undocumented, you don't have a driver's license, the police have the authority to arrest you. But again, they shouldn't do it as a policy in Austin. They can do it in the outside areas and the more rural areas. Let's say you do get detained or arrested by the police. Now, if you're at a protest and you get momentarily detained and not booked, then hopefully someone who's undocumented isn't going to come into the purview of immigration authorities. The way that the notification to ICE is triggered when someone's detained is when they get their when they get booked, when they get their fingerprints taken, when they get taken in and arrested. So if you get taken to the police department and to the jail for processing, that's when ICE will put a hold on the person, and that starts the 48-hour window for ICE to come and pick you up and process you. And the way it happens in Austin, when someone who has an ICE hold, it completes their criminal case. Let's say you get out on personal bond, or you pay a bond, or you don't get charged with anything, or your case is complete. However it wraps up in criminal, ICE then has 48 hours to come and pick you up. And so the way that it happens in Austin and surrounding areas is ICE will go pick someone up from the jail. They'll transfer them to Central Processing, which is the federal building on 8th Street. That is not an overnight processing center. There's no beds there. They're not equipped to hold people overnight. So that is a processing that always happens within a day. If you have super compelling emergency situation at that point, on very rare circumstances, we can advocate with Austin ICE deportation officers to release someone. Let's say we have a mother of a very ill infant who's nursing. Something that urgent might allow us to get someone out at that point. Typically, 99% of the time, what they're doing for someone who's undocumented or who maybe has a green card, but they've committed a deportable offense and they're going to be put in removal proceedings, ICE will process everything and then within the day send that person to a detention center, an immigration detention center. The places around Austin that most people go to, the biggest one is Pearsall, or it's actually called the South Texas Detention Complex, and it's in Pearsall, which is an hour south of San Antonio. It holds thousands of individuals. And there's also Hutto, which is in Taylor, actually. It's named after T. Don Hutto, who's founder of the Corrections Corporation of America, CoreCivic, which is a private prison company. That's a women's only facility. There's other places. There's ICE detention centers all around the country. Typically, people arrested in Central Texas will be detained by ICE in Central Texas. So the thing to know about the processing in Austin is that ICE officers, again, in my experience, based on stories that people have told me over the years, their main goal is to just get someone to sign a deportation and just get them out of the system and get them back. Like if it's someone from Mexico and they're undocumented, that deportation officer just wants to get a signed deportation, get the person back, and avoid all of the processing. And they will say things to get people to just sign over their rights. They'll say things like, you're not eligible for anything. You can't stay here. You're going to be in detention for months if you don't sign this. They really scare people and push them into just signing their deportation. So it's very important for anyone who's being processed that you do not sign away your rights, that you do not listen to the deportation officer's advice. They are not your attorney. They are not your friends. They are not on your side. So do not listen to what they tell you. Just don't sign anything. Ask to speak to, you can call our office. Our number is 512-599-8500. You can call your family, who ideally will already have our number saved. They'll have all your important documents, your marriage certificate, your birth certificates, proof of your tax returns, proof of your address, all the things that we need to prove that you're a person of good moral character with longstanding ties to the community. In a perfect world, you will have planned and thought about this potential scenario, and you'll have a folder of documents saved somewhere in your house, and you can call your loved one and say, I've been detained, call my lawyer, get the documents. And then we get called, we immediately start communicating with ICE. Another person you can call, especially for Mexican nationals, is the Mexican consulate, because they're really helpful with helping their people contact family and get their stuff together. Hi, Wilbert. Hi, Michelle. Thank you for being here with me today. Hi, Anna. Thanks for coming again. So great to see you with me every week. I really appreciate you guys joining me, and feel free to ask your questions or share this video. So that's that's the ideal scenario, is that you've planned ahead, you've saved some money, because it does cost money. It costs money to hire an attorney to get you out on bond. It costs money to pay a bond, although you get it back at the end of your case if you appear in your hearing. But in all likelihood, someone who's been picked up who doesn't have a deportation order already is just going to be transferred to an immigration detention center within a day. And then our work really begins. Then we start advocating for release. Sometimes we'll do a parole request to the ICE officer. If there's a medical issue, related to COVID, we can do a parole request. Or most of the time, we're just doing a bond request to the court. And the judges have authority to issue a bond, and they're focused on two things. Are you a flight risk, and are you a danger to the community? So they're looking at your ties to the country, your how long have you been here? Do you have employment? Do you have a home? And then danger to the community is whether, it's self-explanatory, but what they're looking at there is criminal history. So someone who has multiple DWIs may get denied a bond for danger to the community. It really varies by judge. But when there's a criminal history, we have to really go heavy on the good moral character evidence. And so again, this is why you want to hopefully think about these things before they happen, so that we're semi-prepared and we're not spending any of the precious time while you're in detention gathering documents. We'd like to get ahead on that and not be behind. The process right now for bond takes 2 to 3 weeks. And what we've noticed with our clients who are suffering in detention is that it's horrific for the families and for the children. We don't take a lot of these cases at a time because we want to have the bandwidth to take good care of our clients. We have maybe 3 to 4 clients currently in detention at any time. And we speak to them and their families almost daily because it is so stressful for everyone. So again, planning ahead is a really, really good idea. As awful as it is to contemplate what happens if mom or dad gets detained, you don't want to think about that. But if it does happen, you will be glad that you did think about it. I also want to say that for people who have a deportation order already, obviously you're in much higher risk of getting deported because once there's an order out there, we're much more limited on what we can do. Many people were maybe apprehended entering the country and they didn't appear at their hearing, or they were ordered removed in absentia. That's a deportation order by a judge. And so there's only 2 ways to stop that. One is if you have a fear of returning to your country and you get apprehended and you say to ICE, I have a fear of return, then you go through the credible fear or the reasonable fear interview process. The other is if there's a reason that you didn't attend your hearing, like you didn't get notice of your hearing, we can file a motion to reopen and the deportation is stayed or paused while the motion to reopen is pending. But again, these are things that we don't like to be doing in the moment because while your motion is pending, you stay in detention. So, and to do a really good motion to reopen, we like to do a FOIA, look at your court record, then file the motion. And so ideally, these are all things that we're doing well before any police or immigration interaction happens. So if you think you might be walking around with a deportation order, don't hide from it. Just give us a call. Let us do the research and find out whether there's something we can do for you, because it's so much better to have that information. So let's say back to the person who doesn't have a deportation order, got filed for a bond with our help, gets out of detention on bond. All that means is that your case continues while you're out of detention versus while you're in detention. Doesn't mean your case is approved. So you've got to move to the next step of defending your deportation. And there's lots of ways to defend a deportation. The main ones are asylum or cancellation of removal is for people who've been in the U.S. for longer than 10 years and who have a fear of, not who have a fear, that's asylum. 10 years, you have good moral character, and you have a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, immediate family member who's going to suffer extremely unusual hardship if you get deported. So that's that's the language that they use. What that means is that we're focused on the suffering of your family members. Are there any illnesses in the family? Is there any mental health stuff going on? We really sort of dig into the story of this family and why this family in particular is going to have extensive suffering if it is separated. These are things you want to be doing when you're not in detention. We want to not be fighting these cases for people who are in jail. So the big focus is bond. When people are in detention, our big focus is getting you out and then fighting your deportation. So it's a lot of information. I'll just summarize that. I know a lot of us are feeling compelled right now to do something. I certainly am, and I struggle with feeling like whatever I do is not enough. And for you, maybe the something has to be protesting. And I certainly am not going to tell anyone that that's not the right thing to do. But for people who are already vulnerable because they're undocumented, you are placing yourself at higher risk of getting apprehended if you participate in protests. That's just the reality. And so if you're going to participate in a protest, please prepare, have your documents gathered, have consulted with us and know what's going to happen if you get detained, what your relief is, what you need to have ready, and just be prepared. Just don't get surprised by the outcome, because I don't want that for you, and I know you don't want that for yourselves. So hopefully this is helpful. I'm going to repeat all this information in Spanish in 30 minutes at 12 o'clock. I welcome you all to join me there. And please feel free to share this video. Put your questions on the comments. I'll answer them even after the video is ended. Or if you have a private question, just message us or give us a call or a text message at 512-599-8500. Thanks for being here with me today, guys, and we'll talk soon.